VT, thank you so much for the kind words about the book. Very, very grateful for your feedback on the book. I must say, as I was writing the book, I had sort of come and had a chat with you as I was sort of evolving the approach. And one of the central ideas in the book is actually how my approach flavor contrasts with Ikigai. And I remember you saying Ikigai feels like Mount Everest to a lot of people. So I'm just curious to go back to that moment in time. Can you talk a little bit about your sort of, if I may say, relationship with Ikigai and how you thought about it from your vantage point?
Yeah. No, I think as you rightly said, Ikigai is a very interesting framework. I do think that this framework of saying, find something that is interesting for you, find something that you're good at, and find something that will pay for it is a very interesting, simplified, set of circles which magically coincide. And therefore, it gives you a sense of direction, especially if you're a young person. It feels like something that can be quite inspiring. But I think my concern around Ikigai is that I feel it's a bit unrealistic. And the reason it is unrealistic is that, one, it ignores the fact that, life has multiple stages. And therefore, the very definition of, how you define purpose, how you define what is important to you, can evolve, at different stages in life. And the second is that somehow Ikigai can also make a person quite unhappy, actually. Because if you look at it and you say, hey, look, I am stuck with doing something that is paying me well, but I'm really not. I'm enjoying it, but I don't think it's my purpose in life. It only, allows you, it sets it, I would say, an almost impossible goal. And an impossible goal, which only very, very few privileged might meet. And then you almost start thinking of life in terms of saying, maybe Ikigai is relevant for 1%, and for the remaining 99% is really not relevant, right? And then what happens? And what do you do? So I feel it's a very narrow framework, and it is great. It is like one of those, early philosophy books that you read in engineering college, like a fountainhead of Ayn Rand, and then you draw a lot of inspiration. But, but that's not the be all and end all of life, right?
Right.
As you grow up and then you mature, you realize there are different facets, which I feel, Ikigai doesn't capture, which is what I really like about, flavor. I feel it does a much more effective and more realistic framework for people to think about. Not just, midlife. I'm sure you wrote it in the context of midlife, given where you are in your journey. But it is, I think, highly relevant for anybody, be it the very young or even the very old. Because it suddenly gives you a framework with to approach your life stage and ask some important questions and find the right answer.
A couple of things you said makes a lot of sense, right? One is sort of life is in stages and the transitions that we go through. The other is, I discuss this in the book as well, is what is your purpose is such a heavy question, right? I think it's almost like when you ask somebody, a 5-year-old kid, beta tumko kya banna hai, kind of a question.
Yes.
It's very difficult to answer what is your purpose. And in a way, I think it emerges very often as we walk the path. The other thing that you mention in the advanced praise section, VT, is sort of monotheistic versus polytheistic. Can you expand on that in terms of what you mean?
And I think because I think one of the things I really liked about the book and the flavor framework is I think it allows the possibility of different truths, and it also allows the possibility that different individuals, even at different stages of their own life, can see multiple truths, and that's what I really meant by a very stark difference. In between a monotheistic framework, which is kind of a one version of truth that is expected to fit everybody, versus recognizing that there is inherent polytheism in how you approach life. There is an element of you as a person discovering that at different life stages you may find different things to do to add flavor to your life. And of course, the reality that it is going to be very, very different for each person.
True.
Like, for example, you even think about the 5 people or 6 people that you have covered in the book. Very, very different answers.
Yes.
Very, very different, in terms of how they have traced their journey and the choices they have made. All of them, obviously, based on what you read, feeling like they at least are comfortable that they are fulfilling their potential.
Yes.
But most importantly, fulfilling the potential with a set of yardsticks that they have determined, right? Which they have not allowed other people to determine for them. I think you talk about self-authorship, right? I think very early in the book. And in that context, saying, at some point of time, you have to grow up from being an adolescent to be an adult. And the key part of being an adult is to say, I'm going to define I'm going to define what success means to me, which so many, unfortunately, never ask the question and never find the answer. So I think this way, you need a polytheistic framework.
Right.
And it doesn't mean it's not ideal. It's still, by any definition, framework is ideal because it's hard to get to and hard to execute. And it'll have its imperfections in execution. But I feel that's what I meant when I said it's much more polytheistic and therefore I think relevant to more people.
I came across an interesting quote which stayed with me. The quote says, all frameworks are by design inaccurate.
Yes.
Some are useful. So the objective is not to be accurate because the world is
Absolutely.
too complex to be modeled by any one approach. But hopefully the language is useful to people. At least that's the goal I'm striving towards. I think the other thing you say, in a way, I was really humbled by the words you used. You say the book does to the professional what Vivekananda does for spiritual seekers. I was curious to see you connecting the dots across these two very different spaces. Can you say more about what you had in mind?
Yeah, so look, I don't know much about many things, but at least one of the interesting things that Swami Vivekananda did, especially, this was obviously the time when the various elements of Hindu thought was being reimagined and re-seen, let's call it, through Western eyes, right? And one of the things that many of the Occidentalists, Orientalists as well, struggled with was they were trying to figure out the various strands in Hindu thought, right? Because on the one hand, Hinduism talks about bhakti. The other hand, Hinduism talks about Ishtadevata, the notion of a personal god, the notion of idol worship. And then you had somebody like, Swami Dayananda Saraswati talk about, no idol worship. How do we think about worship in the Hindu context without idols? Then you have the context of, obviously, as Max Muller was translating, you had the Vedic approach to life, which felt very different, which looked very different from what they were seeing in the context of temples and Puranas and the stories. And then there was, of course, at the end of all of it, there was Vedanta, absolutely esoteric, brilliant, philosophy, which kind of laid out a whole generation of people and how they thought about life and how they thought about the universe and how they thought about, existence. So I think it was therefore, and therefore from a Western view, when somebody was coming in and seeing, they were seeing India, they were seeing Hinduism, and it was very confusing because you could see everything. You could see what St. Thomas of Apostle would have said. You would see what the Romans and the Greeks were doing. If you were to go back and see in Roman mythology and Greek mythology, you were also suddenly seeing somebody like an Immanuel Kant and Critique of Pure Reason, and it is all very confusing because you could also therefore literally throw a dart, and find a believer, and he would have a view which is very different. And I think what Swami Vivekananda did, and this is less for maybe the practitioners, and maybe even for the practitioners of India, but also to make sense. I think what he kind of did a step-by-step ladder assessment, right? And almost saying, hey, look, there is a goal and there are different steps in that goal. And in that context, he kind of very neatly spoke about the place of bhakti and Ishtadevata, and then kind of said, that's maybe level 1, crudely put, level 2 where he says, there is a notion of, what were the Vedas trying to do and what does a Vedic way of life mean and what does that mean and what does it translate into how we behave. And then finally in the context of Vedanta, saying that, look, obviously ultimate purpose of life is pure Brahman. And how do you find the God in you? And that ability to say, it's a ladder approach to life, right? Saying, hey, look, it's not one to the exclusion of the other. Almost saying, hey, look, you may start with bhakti. Now, of course, everyone may not agree, but Vivekananda was very clear on where he wanted people to go. He was trying to say, hey, it's a journey. It's like a step-by-step ladder. At the end of it, you hopefully, learn and seek wisdom in Vedanta. But he could see and put all this in the context of the journey of an individual. And I feel that is what that allowed suddenly people to do is it allows people to put all the things that they were doing in the context of one framework.
Interesting.
And make sense of it. And to me, what was interesting about the book and the reason why I quoted Vivekananda is like, see, if the goal is to play to your potential.
Yes.
And whatever that play to an individual human's potential, which is what even Vivekananda said. Vivekananda's belief was effectively Krishna in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 2 and 3 was exhorting Arjuna saying you must fulfill your potential. And if you don't fulfill your potential, he says that's the biggest sin, whatever that potential is. Of course, he frames it in the context of sin. And he says that is why, it is wrong. So he almost made it a moral point, saying that if you don't fulfill your potential, you owe it to yourself. And if you didn't, that is sin. That's like the very esoteric, very, very provocative definition of playing to potential. But the question is, if that is the goal, how do you kind of get there? And what are the stages of it, and how it can change and how it can move? But the goal is the same.
Very
the goal is the same. And to me, that was very interesting, because what this book does is it first of all, it says, look, there are different truths. Or rather, there is a truth, and the truth can be perceived in different ways. The truth is unique and tailored to your individual. But it is in the context of the individual's potential.
Correct.
Right? It is in the context of the individual potential. And therefore, can you find your way, where it works for you? And if it works for you when you're a young adult, if it works for you when you're middle-aged, when it works for you when you're older, think about how you would have fulfilled your potential at all points of time in life. It's also not potential at the end of life.
And it's not static, it's evolving.
It's evolving, and it's potential at that point of time. Right?
True.
And I think therefore I thought it at least reminded me of this, and therefore I thought it was a useful reference.
Lovely. Very, very kind of you. And VT, I see you as somebody who's intentional about being holistic about playing to potential. So what does playing to potential mean to you, given where you stand today?
See, I think it is first is to define your yardsticks of success, which is very important. Second is to recognize that, like Buddha said, finally you are walking alone in your journey, right? And of course you are interacting and touching various important people in your life at various levels. But to me, playing to potential is, recognizing the yardsticks of success that matter to you and matter to you as a person in terms of values. Second is by necessary exhorting yourself, because by very definition, playing to potential is breaking that inertia, right? And saying, hey, okay, fine, if this is what I want to do, how do you exhort yourself and work towards realizing, what is it that you have articulated? I think that is the second. And third is to, in that journey, loving yourself, being kind to yourself, because finally that is very important.
Yes.
Because you're going to make mistakes, and this notion is going to be imperfect along the way. And all this will require you to, introspect very deeply inside, and also look around and ask, what your external perception of what you are is, so that you're kind of marrying and matching the two and making sense of it, right? But to me, playing potential is exhorting yourself to, at that point of time in your life stage, to say, hey, are you matching up to what you really want to do? Figure out what you want to do. Don't have an external marker. Don't allow the world to define what it is. But after having defined yourself, are you putting in the effort to get there? Because I think that book also makes the point, finally, all the stories that you talk about, it's people putting in real effort.
True.
Right? Working on it and exhorting themselves to do it. And I think therefore it quite appeals to me, because it's quite remarkable that effectively in work, what you're asking people to do is absolutely the right thing that many people have said in very different, interesting ways.
It's lovely, VT. I think the word that stays with me at the end of this conversation is exhorting, right? In a way, that's a very fresh perspective. It's provocative, but in a way, you exhorting yourself to sort of work towards that potential. I think it's such a refreshing take on the word.
Absolutely. Look, I think if you go back in the Gita, I think Krishna is even more extreme, right? He says you die and go to heaven, or you win the battle and stay here, but you have to do. You have to do, and you have to exhort yourself, to do it, because, don't be listless, and don't be, after having figured all this out, after having read your book, don't say, interesting book and sit.
That's wonderful.
Exhort yourself and do something about what the book has made you think.
Lovely. VT, thank you so much for the kind words in the book, but also to make the time to do this.
No, thank you. My pleasure.